Today is Tuesday, February 4th, 2025, and this is William Michael, the headmaster of the Classical Liberal Arts Academy. I'd like to take up a question that's entirely theoretical, but is at the same time very serious. I'd like to take up the question, what would I do if I was asked to reform Catholic schools, or if the bishops of the Catholic Church, let's say the American bishops, were to bring me in and ask me what my advice would be for the reformation of Catholic schools in America? What would my answer be? I've been working as a Catholic in education, in private education now for 20 years. So I've seen quite a bit from a number of different perspectives. I was a public school student myself. I went to a Catholic CCD program as a kid. I went to a public university, worked in private Christian schools, then worked in private tutoring, and have worked with homeschooling families. So I've got experience in a wide range of schooling environments, and I've watched from afar. I've watched to see what Catholic schools do, what happens to Catholic schools, how Catholic schools are closing. I've looked at statistics to see that there were twice as many students enrolled in Catholic schools 60 years ago as there are today, so things are not going well. I look at the prices of Catholic schools. I talk to Catholic parents about why they don't send their children to Catholic schools. I hear priests talking about why they wouldn't recommend sending kids to Catholic schools. So I don't have a rosy-colored view of the Catholic schools, and I see lots of signs that things aren't going well. When we see that the teachers in the Catholic schools are not necessarily even Catholics, that there's no more brothers or sisters teaching in the schools because the supply has dried up. When we look at the cost, when we look at the fact that the student bodies of the Catholic schools are not even made up of Catholics necessarily, we can see that there are many red flags that things are not going well. Now, you may ask, why haven't I been directly involved in Catholic schools? And I can tell you, I have contacted local Catholic schools on a number of occasions and have never received feedback. Or if I did receive feedback, it was negative. So I've made efforts to teach at Catholic schools. I've made efforts to contact Catholic schools and have never been allowed to do so. So I haven't been able to help directly, and I've contented myself with working privately. When the Classical Liberal Arts Academy was accredited by Cognia, I think it sort of makes this look ridiculous. A man who has worked in education for almost 30 years now doesn't get a response or gets a negative response from local Catholic schools, even though he taught in one of the most prestigious private schools in the area, and who runs an educational program by himself and earns the same accreditation that the Catholic schools themselves boast of. The lack of response, the lack of feedback, the negative feedback obviously doesn't make much sense, but that's the state of things, and I just want to make that clear in case anyone asked, if you are so interested in Catholic schools, why don't you help? I've offered to help. So there's nothing else that I can do. But having developed the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, which is now accredited, and thinking about Catholic schools, if I was asked, what would you do to reform the Catholic schools? I'd like to explore what my answer might be. And this is not a scripted talk. I don't have notes in front of me. This is just a casual discussion as I take a break from my work to talk about a topic that I have great interest in. The very first thing I would do, which is just common sense, if I was asked by the bishops, what would you do to reform the Catholic schools? The first thing that I would do is I would say, what exactly is the mission of the Catholic schools? What exactly? I don't want any vague religious talk. I don't want any platitudes, any good wishes. What specifically is the mission of the Catholic schools? And once that mission was articulated, I would ask if we could be critical of that stated mission. Is that mission appropriate for Catholic schools? Is that mission necessary? Is that mission appropriate, as I said, for Catholic schools or for the Catholic Church? Is that mission appropriate? Is that mission already being carried out by someone else? Because that's an important question. And the Church plays the hypocrite on this question, because let's think about it. If I decided that I wanted to start my own religious community, and I put together this, mission statement and description, I said, I want to start a new Catholic religious community. And the purpose of this religious community will be to pray and to study and to preach the gospel and to teach. We'll develop a strong community of contemplative students and teachers, and we'll go into the world and do apostolic work, teaching and preaching the Catholic faith. That religious community would not be approved by the Catholic Church. And it's not because it isn't good, it's not because it's not Catholic, it's not because it's not important. It would not be approved because the Dominican order already does all of those things. That order, that religious community already exists. There's already someone doing that work. And it would be better for me if my mission statement aligned almost exactly with that of the Dominican order. It would be better for me to join the Dominican order than to pretend that I'm going to start some new religious community that does essentially the same thing. So if we draft a mission statement for the Catholic schools and we find that mission statement describes activity that's already being done in the community, then it wouldn't make any sense to pursue that mission. And I think many Catholic schools would fail to get past this first test. If I were to ask, what is the mission of the Catholic school? And someone were to say, the mission of the Catholic school is to lead children to the completion of modern high school requirements and help them to prepare for college admission, I would say, we already have schools that do that. We already have schools in our community that don't even require tuition. We have public schools that serve that mission. We already have schools that do that. So it doesn't make any sense for the mission of the Catholic school to be to lead a group of students to the satisfaction of state high school graduation requirements and college admission. That wouldn't make any sense. The public school is already funded by the American people to do that. So that obviously can't be the mission statement of the Catholic schools. And yet, I believe that many others, if they were asked what's wrong with the Catholic schools, their answer would be something like, Catholic schools have just become a place where you pay private school tuition to receive a public school education. Why would someone pay private school tuition for a public school education? And we might say, oh, well, that's because the culture, because the group of people at the Catholic school is not the same as the people at the public school. Well, then put that in the mission statement. If that's the real purpose of a Catholic school, then put that in the mission statement and publish it on the diocesan websites. Publish it on the school website. Say, the purpose of this Catholic school is to provide the opportunity for students to pursue a public school education with the benefit of an exclusive community of families that can afford private school tuition. Let that be the mission statement of the schools, because I believe that for many people, that is in fact the reason why they're interested in Catholic schools. They want really just an ordinary modern K-12 education, but they want it in something of an exclusive community. And we hear people complaining about this all the time. We hear politicians complaining about this. We hear Democrats, for example, who are opposed to school choice, complaining that the reason why people want school choice is because they don't want to send their children to school with your children. If that's the purpose of the Catholic school, to simply offer an exclusive place where people who can afford to pay both property taxes that cover the public school costs and an additional private school tuition payment, to enjoy a community where the population is controlled, then just make that the mission statement of the school. If that's not the mission statement, then, or if we would be embarrassed to admit that that should be the mission statement, then what would the mission statement be? And this is where I think we'd start to get into trouble. Because what's going on in many Catholic schools would now be challenged by a different mission statement than something vague, like we basically provide a public school education at private school cost, or we allow families interested in a public school education for their children to get it in a controlled community. That would be embarrassing when you've got this Jesus loves everybody message coming from the church, and yet we're creating schools that basically block most of the everybody out of the school. We wouldn't want to write that. So we'd have to come up with something that's more Catholic, more religious. And again, when individual schools or individual dioceses do this, it causes all kinds of controversy. People get upset. We've seen this in our own diocese, where individual schools or a principal or a certain priest has tried to push the school into a more specifically Catholic mission, has been met with all kinds of resistance. So what would the mission be? Again, assuming that I was asked to give counsel as to how I would reform the Catholic schools, because again, they're not doing well. This idea that we're going to give a K-12 education to kids at private school cost is not a serious mission, especially when we're doing this in the name of Catholicism, and most of the Catholic community doesn't or can't attend the school. What should the mission be? I would suggest a mission like this. I would suggest a mission like, and this is being pretty simple, pretty generous. I would say that the purpose of a Catholic school is to provide an education, a K to 12 education, because that's required by compulsory laws, a K to 12 education for every Catholic child that ensures that the necessary education that's required by law is provided, and is provided in a context that is faithfully Catholic, so that the formation of Catholic children is provided with their necessary K to 12 education. That's very verbose, but you can see the idea. If it's a Catholic school, then I would demand that it be a school for Catholics. What would qualify a student to attend is that the student is a Catholic. And if a student is a Catholic, he or she would be welcome to attend the Catholic school. That would seem pretty obvious. It would be in the concern of the leadership to see that every Catholic child, all the little lambs in the church, are provided with an education where they're safe. And when I say safe, I don't mean physically safe. I mean spiritually safe, safe in every way. Where they're safe, where they can grow and learn in an environment where they're taught the Catholic faith, where the adults in the school model the Catholic faith, not where they promote an indifferentism and suggest that it doesn't really matter if you're Catholic or not, but a place where the Catholic faith is taught, the Catholic faith is modeled, the Catholic faith is held in honor, and children are allowed to grow in the Catholic faith in an immersive way while also satisfying their compulsory education requirements. And if we were to take that wordy motto or mission statement and distill it into a more specific statement, again, this isn't a scripted talk, so that work of distilling the mission down into a concise statement, it would be something like to provide a quality K to 12 education for every Catholic child. I would suggest something like that. To provide a quality education for every Catholic child. I think that would be a respectable and necessary mission statement. After all, the public schools don't provide that. The Protestant schools in town don't provide that. Only the Catholic school could provide that. A quality education for every Catholic child. Or I even go further, a quality Catholic education for every Catholic child. That would be a noble goal for Catholic schools. And we don't have to pretend that we don't know what a quality Catholic education looks like. It would be an education that satisfies the purposes of education as they're explained in the Catechism of the Catholic Church. We don't need to act like we don't know what schools are supposed to do. The Church is very clear. The Church has been involved in education for 2,000 years. We have a very extensive history of what education looks like. We've got a whole hall of fame of doctors and fathers of the church, great scholars and schoolmasters who have made it very clear by word and deed what quality Catholic education looks like. And while society has certainly changed, and there are many things that we need to think about and provide for in 2025 that were not provided for in 1300 or in 1800, much of what was taught in 1300 and 1800 still needs to be taught in 2025. In fact, the more important, the more substantial content of the curriculum would be the same that has existed through all of church history. What is changing is not that Catholic substance. What is changing may be the modern curriculum, modern compulsory education requirements, modern college preparatory standards, modern career preparation standards, and so on. But the substance of the Catholic faith and catechesis, or even evangelization, the church today likes to talk about evangelistic catechesis, that can't be neglected. And what that actually consists of is the same as it has been for 2,000 years. Christ himself was the great teacher of our faith. So it's no mystery what a quality Catholic education would consist of, and it would not be one or the other. It would not be a faithful program of catechesis or a useful K-12 education. It would need to be both. We would need to provide students with a rigorous and faithful Catholic program of catechesis, while also satisfying the less important but the less important but necessary modern school requirements. It's very clear what a quality Catholic education would consist of. And if anyone would like me to get into all of the details of that, I can, because I run an accredited school. I'd be happy to get into all of the curriculum details that cover both Catholic formation and modern compulsory education requirements. But something like that would be a good starting point, at least, for a mission statement: to provide a quality Catholic education for every Catholic child. After all, we're so concerned about the poor, aren't we? We're so concerned about social justice and equity. We're so concerned about these things. Whatever we offered in the name of education, it would have to be available for all Catholic students. After all, every one of the children in every parish is accountable to fulfill compulsory education standards. They all need schooling. And if we wanted to give quality Catholic education to children who need to be educated, well, that would apply to all of the children in every parish. And that would lead us to the next round of discussions. So the first thing that I would do, if I was asked how I would reform Catholic schools, not that I ever will be asked, but if I was asked, I would say the first thing we need to do is we need to establish a clear mission statement for the Catholic schools that actually makes sense. And I would suggest as a starting point something like, the Catholic schools exist to provide quality Catholic education to all Catholic children. Now, the next round of discussions, we'd begin to flesh that out. So with that mission statement, with our goal there, our mission statement, we'd begin to ask how that can be done. And you can see that there are immediately practical problems that need to be solved. To provide a quality Catholic education for every Catholic child. Now, to do that, we can see very clearly that what's being done in modern Catholic schools cannot be the solution. What's done in modern Catholic schools, modern private Catholic schools, cannot be the solution because it does not provide quality Catholic education. Some would argue it doesn't provide quality Catholic education at all. But it certainly doesn't, and I don't even want to get into that discussion because there's a bigger problem to discuss that would come first. We wouldn't even need to have that discussion. The bigger question would be, how do we provide quality Catholic education for every Catholic child? That's the real challenge. Now, if I was asked to privately tutor the child of a billionaire, it'd be very, very easy. I would just say, well, I can just sit with the student all day, every day, even overnight, and we can just work on studies constantly. And anything that I can't provide, I would be sort of a chaperone for the student. I can drive him to his swimming lessons or to his music classes if I can't teach those things. And I would teach him the core content of his studies, and I would bring him around to other experts in other fields to provide him with a fully well-rounded education. I would just work with the student around the clock all the time, and I would bill all of my time and all of the costs of whatever we do. I would just bill that to Daddy Warbucks, who would have no problem writing those checks. It's very easy to educate individual children, especially if they have wealthy parents. What's difficult is educating poor children, and not even destitute poor. I'm not talking about educating children living in famished lands in Africa or in. I'm not talking nonsense. I'm talking the children of parents who don't have thousands of dollars to spend on education. That's the challenge in education. And we can't just say, oh, well, children like that can't be educated. Children in history like that were educated. I can give examples. St. John Bosco, whose feast day was just a couple of days ago. St. John Bosco was a penniless child in Italy who received a Catholic education. So this idea that the poor kids just can't have it, well, that's just a cop-out. The problem is the way that schools are organized, modern Catholic schools, the way they're organized does not allow for any student whose parents can't write significant tuition checks. And so the method that's employed is obviously not the solution. It can't be the solution. And so this begins to lead us to practical discussions about reform. This is something I always talk with students and even my wife in our household discussions. I explain to my wife that good decisions are not just decisions that have the best theoretical explanation. They're often decisions that take into consideration all of our responsibilities or all of the details and challenges of a situation and account for all of them. That's a good decision. And so when we get to this discussion of Catholic education and we say, what would a good Catholic school look like? The very first thing that we would need to address is that we would need to be able to educate all Catholic children. It would need to be an education that's available to all Catholic children. We can't just isolate the rich kids and pretend that they're supposed to be educated, and then leave all of the poorer kids to go to the public schools. Are there no workhouses? Are there no prisons for all those kids? Can't they just go to the free schools? That's especially unacceptable when the same church leaders are going to turn around and lecture everyone about caring for the poor and making sure that everyone has this and that and everything is fair. And in their own schools, they don't practice these principles, which is why no one takes the social justice talk seriously. The Catholic Church needs to model this social justice message, not just point at others when they don't keep it. The Catholic Church herself doesn't keep her own principles of social justice. And we could say, well, education is not a need or a right, it's a privilege. That's not true in a society with compulsory education laws. It is a necessity, a legal necessity. So to send anyone who can't afford the tuition check or to know that there are X number of children in a parish and there are X minus Y number of seats available in the school that we've built, and then to tell the Y students to go to public schools, that's not a responsible solution. So we'd have to consider all of the children. So we'd have to start with a blank sheet of paper and say, how could we arrange the education of Catholic children, or what would a quality Catholic education look like that would be available for every Catholic child? And we would immediately see that the modern K-12 system, which was invented for use in state-funded public schools where money is not an object, where the money can be raised at any time, the school model that was designed to serve the public school system, the tax-funded school system, cannot be an option for the Catholic Church, unless, of course, we're going to tax the Catholic people, which, of course, we're not going to do. So the modern K-12 model, and just think about it, what are the essential characteristics of the modern K-12 model? Well, we take a large population of children, usually from a wide geographical area, and we bring them all together into one school. We've got hundreds of students, multiple classrooms filled with students of the same age and grade level. We bring all of these children together, hundreds of children together, and then we sort them. We sort them by birth date. We sort them by birth date, and we put them into grade levels. All of this is artificial. We put them into grade levels, so we may have 100 first grade students. And we then figure out how many of those children one teacher can manage in a classroom, and we say, well, 20 to 30 students maybe a teacher can manage. We can put 20 or 30 desks in a room, and one teacher can oversee the activity of let's say 25 students. And of course, we're going to immediately be pressured by the need to make the teacher to student ratio as low as possible, right? Which is going to lead to other problems. But we're going to say, let's say 25. So now we've got 100 students who are first grade age. So we're going to need 4 full-time teachers to manage the 6 and 7-year-olds, our first grade classes. So we need 4 full-time teachers. Now here come all of the labor union people and all of the rights for workers people who are going to tell us that these teachers can only work 180 days for 8 hours a day, and they need to be paid $50 an hour for their work. And so now we've got this ballooning overhead to have these 4 teachers oversee these 100 students. And we're already in trouble, and we've only addressed the needs of 100 students. So let's take 4 full-time salaries. Let's say the teachers need to be paid $60,000, $240,000 a year for their pay. Divide that by 100 students, and you can already see we've got a significant tuition bill, and we don't even have a school building. We don't have any books. We haven't even started. Just to find the faculty, we've already got a tuition crisis. And you just see, this idea of education was designed for a public school where money wouldn't be no object. Everything would be tax funded. The entire population would pay all the bills. Everyone who owns a home is paying property taxes, and the property taxes are all being collected regardless of who you are, how many children you have. If you have no children, if you're 30 years old or 80 years old, it doesn't matter. Property taxes are collected, and a huge portion of those taxes is given to the public schools to just fund whatever they do. The Catholic schools cannot operate in that way, and so the model obviously makes no sense. If we look at a parish, I think my parish is rather extraordinary. We're out in a rural area. We have a very large number of children in our parish. There's no Catholic school in the entire county, even though there are thousands of children. There's no parish school, there's no school, no Catholic school in the entire county. Why? There's no way we can afford to build what's essentially a public school for all the Catholic kids. So, what's the alternative? No Catholic school, no Catholic education. Just go to the public school. This is what happens because the one model that the Catholic schools seem to be willing to allow, the one model, that is the public school model, is simply not sustainable. It doesn't allow us to fulfill the mission to provide quality Catholic education for every Catholic child. So rather than just tell all of the children who can't come to just, go to the public school, what we should do is get rid of the public school model. The problem is not that there's too many children. The problem is that the model that we're using for the schools is not appropriate for the mission of the Catholic schools. The model of the public schools is not appropriate for use in private education. That should be obvious, but it's very convenient. It's very convenient to just pretend that there's only one way. And if we were to go back into Catholic history and ask, were these K-12 model schools always used in Catholic history? The answer is obviously no. They were invented in the public school age for public schooling. And we can look at the Catholic parochial schools that were established and ask, well, how did they develop? And we can find that there were some unique historical circumstances that allowed it to appear to be possible for schools that looked and operated like public schools to work for Catholics. But it quickly became obvious that that plan was possible only because of unique historical circumstances, namely the immigration of European Catholics. And that once that flood of religious sisters and brothers who would be willing to teach for no salary dried up, we would have a crisis. And we see that crisis kick in the middle of the 20th century. So that school model is going to become the issue that we have to discuss. And with the mission of the school written on the wall, it's going to become clear that that model is going to have to be abandoned. So where would my reform of Catholic schools begin? It would begin, practically speaking, with the abandonment of the public school model. That model of schooling is not appropriate for Catholic schools, not sustainable. And we can see that. If we've got 1,000 children, 1,000 Catholic children who need a Catholic education, we need a form of education, a system of education that can serve 1,000 children, not 100 of them. So that would be the first challenge with respect to reform. And if we were to look back in history and say, well, has Catholic education ever been provided for large numbers of students without using the K-12 model? The answer, of course, is yes. Of course it has been. And we can look very simply, very, very practically. This isn't a complicated dilemma. This isn't some mystery that needs to be explored or investigated. We can go right back to the Jesuit rule of studies and see how they organized schools that served hundreds and hundreds of students for practically no cost. Because we've got to consider what resources we have available and what the needs are, and how those resources can best serve those needs. And the modern schools do not do that. And again, if we look back into history, one of the significant differences is that they were not dealing with compulsory education laws as we are. Catholic children today must go to school. And so we've got to consider this as, one of these changing circumstances. We've got to provide for every child. So rather than divide the children horizontally, I would say, divide them and spread them out horizontally by age, which is a totally artificial means and really irrational means of separating students. Rather than separate them, spread them out on the ground, as it were, and have them classed by age, and have full-time teachers assigned to every individual group, because we're going to separate them all into isolated classrooms to be overseen by a full-time individual teacher. And that, of course, gets more complicated as the kids get older into 4th and 5th grade, where one teacher no longer teaches all the subjects, but now they've got multiple teachers covering different subjects, and it continues into high school where it gets even more complicated. Instead of that, there would need to be a more natural, a more reasonable, vertical arrangement of students based on their progress in studies. And what's better about a vertical arrangement of students, which has always been used in history, the vertical arrangement of students who are higher up in the school are able to help the students who are under them. In modern schools, do 5th grade students help 1st grade students? Do 8th grade students help 3rd grade students? Do 12th grade students help 7th grade students? No, they're all separated and isolated because the modern school system has been designed to serve as a big contest where everyone works individually and tries to prove that he or she is better than his classmates. And the Catholic schools follow this plan as anyone else does. We talk about grade point average, class rank, and so on. We sort the kids into different levels. Oh, these are the honor students. They're the level 1 students. They're the Bobo students. Do the honor students help the Bobos? No, they're competing against each other to see who's going to come out on top in class rank. They're competing against each other because the grade point average scale is weighted, and the honors students have to focus on their honors classes so they can get more points so they can have a higher class rank. It's a big contest. All the kids are brought together and then separated in this horizontal system that's completely unlike the church, which again makes no sense. We have the wisdom of the organization of the church, and we take that and we throw it out the window when it's time to organize a school. And we say, I don't know, what's the world doing? Oh, they've got this horizontal, totally unsustainable, giant, wasteful, unproductive grade level system that they use where all the kids are ranked and sorted and they're all numbered based on their individual performance and made to compete against each other. Maybe we should follow that. That serves no Catholic principle at all. But that's what we'll use. Why? Because we're lazy. That's why. We don't want to face this problem. And to be honest, I think that we're embarrassed of the Catholic religion. We're embarrassed of the Catholic Church, embarrassed of Catholic faith and wisdom. And we just want to be like everybody else. But in history, the fundamental principle of the arrangement of schools was vertical. So there would be a headmaster or schoolmaster standing at the top of the school. And he was responsible for all of the school's instruction, all of the school's assessment. And again, we have an example of this in the scriptures where Moses leads the people of Israel out of Egypt and is set over them as their judge. And the question is, how in the world are we going to manage this work? And Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, comes to him and says, you can't handle all of this yourself. What you need to do is create a hierarchy of judges and delegate the work of simpler cases to other judges. And you take the most difficult cases. This isn't a mystery. And a school, when schools were arranged by Christians according to Christian principles, schools were arranged vertically and hierarchically. And so the master who stood at the top of the hierarchy was responsible for all of the education of the entire school. That's why he was called the headmaster, the head teacher. He wasn't just some office-bound administrator. He was himself the teacher of all the teachers. He was responsible for the entire system. But he would not teach handwriting to first grade age children. He would not teach the basics of grammar and arithmetic. He would delegate that work to others. And so the question might be, well, to whom would he delegate it? Now, of course, he could bring in some professional 7-year-old teacher. He could bring in some young woman with a master's degree in elementary education who specializes in teaching addition facts to 7-year-olds and pay her $60,000 a year. He could do that. Or he could have a number of 5th grade students turn around and serve as tutors and assistants to help the younger children. Or they could be older. They could be high school students who go down and work with the younger children. So where would these sources of instruction come from? From experienced students. Why would we need to bring in some so-called expert to teach lessons that she herself may have never studied, especially in a Catholic school, when we've already taught our own students in school who are available and could assist with these things? And it could be part of their education because, after all, Aristotle taught that we know that a person understands something when he is able to teach it. So this challenge, this exercise, this responsibility of teaching other students would actually be a very essential part of the assessment of the learning of the older and more advanced students. Not a distraction, not some kind of slave labor. It's not oppressive. It's part of the educational system because teaching is the ultimate assessment. And that's according to Aristotle, who, at least historically, Catholics used to think was a pretty smart fellow. But schools were organized vertically, hierarchically, and the work of instruction and assessment and supervision was delegated to others. That system was employed for a number of reasons. But if we think about the case with Moses as a very vivid example, it was because justice needed to be served to every single person in the community. He couldn't just say, look, who cares about the poor people? They can just go someplace. We don't care if they get ripped off or injured or assaulted. We don't have time for that. We're going to take the big cases. That would not be just. And so the concern for Moses was that everyone received justice, from the greatest to the least. And of course, in the Catholic Church, we'll use all of this language of equality and justice for all, but then we don't practice it. We don't practice it. What would the school look like if we actually practiced justice for all or education for all? It would not look like the modern Catholic school program. We would not organize the children horizontally, spreading them out and having them all compete against each other as individuals in grade levels like the modern public schools, which are terrible, we would have to take into consideration the education and needs of all of the Catholic children. The public school method would not be an option. And we would have to arrange the schools differently so that all children had access to education. And it would not come through all of the crazy ideas and all the crazy schemes of modern public schools where, again, there's lots of stuff possible because they just bill it all to the people. The Catholic schools don't have that luxury that the state does. We're also a country that's got a gazillion-dollar national debt. So rather than imitate the fools, I mean, let's think about Psalm 1, right? Rather than walk in the way of sinners or sit in the seat of the scornful, rather than imitate the unbelievers, why don't we let biblical Christian wisdom, the wisdom that was on display through history when saints were tasked with developing schools, why don't we look to their examples? Why don't we look to Moses and how he administered justice for the entire Jewish community? Why don't we look to the Jesuits and how they educated hundreds of children with just a couple of Jesuit missionaries? Why don't we look to our own history, our own sacred history, and actually practice the wisdom present in our own tradition and develop a solution for schools that is superior to what the unbelievers do? Isn't that what we should be doing? If we are in fact God's people, filled with the Holy Spirit, enlightened by divine wisdom, shouldn't we have better solutions? And when I say better, I don't mean that our SAT scores are 20 points higher than theirs. And so all of the benefits of divine wisdom and inspiration lead to an increase in scores of 20 points. I think there's more value available to us than some higher scores, or the fact that we can beat them in a basketball game. I think that there are more substantial benefits available to us than outdoing them by a few points in their own contests. We should be far superior to any unbelievers in any work of education, especially in modern society, especially in this confused, chaotic, corrupt, modern democratic society that can't even figure out what gender a person is. Catholic schools should be nowhere remotely close to these schools in achievement and quality. And yet we're boasting of the fact that we're a few points ahead of these failing schools. We should be embarrassed that we're even comparing these things. We have the wisdom of the ancients to guide us and show us how this equality of education can be made available to all Catholic children, not by following the modern K-12 system, but by thinking of it practically, thinking of the goals, and then developing a system that allows the goals to be achieved. And we don't have to invent this because it's already been done before. It's already been done before. And now we understand that there needs to be this hierarchical system where this work of education can be delegated. It does not need to be delegated to state-licensed so-called experts who come with enormous student loan debts to bear, demanding state-level salaries and benefits pack. We don't have to deal with any of that. This is a private school. This is a private school. We have the right to have our own policies. It's a private school. We do not need to pretend that we are accountable to public school standards. We're a private school system. We can arrange instruction and assessment and supervision privately using the resources available to us, because one resource that's not available to us is an infinite supply of tax-gathered money. Like St. Peter said when he was asked by the beggar going into the temple to give alms, and Peter said, "Gold and silver I do not have, but what I have I give you." Why can't Catholic schools bring that spirit of St. Peter, bring wisdom, bring truth, bring virtue to the world, rather than try to compete with these foolish, superficial things? So we can see that the structure of the school would need to be entirely different. And again, we don't have to invent this. It's already been done through history. Because the school is structured differently, we would also need to look at the question of facilities and ask, what would facilities look like that were designed to serve this different arrangement, where we took as our responsibility providing a quality Catholic education for every single Catholic child. And we structured this system where every child was welcome. There was no question. Any Catholic child, any child in the church was welcome. Even children coming from outside would be welcome. Why? How could that be possible? Because the children themselves would be raised to become tutors of other children. This is not a mystery. But then we would be led to questions about facilities and the actual operational methods of how these things can be done. And this is where we would need to say, time out, we live in different circumstances. We're not living in the Middle Ages. We're not living in the 1980s. We're living in an age where education can be delivered digitally to every child in their own home. So rather than have this separation between the private school kids and the homeschool kids, we would need to consider what the best solution would be, not for people who say, "Oh, but we like schools." Well, you also don't take responsibility for the education of every Catholic child. So your preferences can't be allowed to become the rule. The schools are not serving the mission. And in order to serve the mission, we would either need to design radically different school facilities that allow for this hierarchical system, or we would need, and I would suggest, making use of technology to provide this education to all children. Now, there may be some children who can complete all of the education from home. There may be some whose parents need to work and they need a place where they can be supervised for the day. You see, those needs are not the same. But it's not necessarily the rich kids who can afford to go to school and all the poor kids need to stay home. It's actually the children with working parents are the ones most in need of daily supervision at school, and they're often the ones denied. They're sent to the pub. It's such a mess when you think about how imprudent and counterproductive the present arrangement is. So as we consider the actual execution of this mission, we would see that it would have to be designed from the bottom up with consideration for available technology, what students actually need, what we actually need to provide students with for their studies and for their assessment and so on. There are many tasks that were formerly handled, that were delegated to other students that can be replaced by technology. The need for facilities is not what it is for a modern public school. The modern school facility may look very differently in this environment than it would for a public school. And so with the mission as the guide, with the wisdom of a hierarchical system as the framework, and with all of the available technology and resources and all of the different circumstances of the students, a practical plan would need to be developed with respect to facilities, which would be very different from what exists currently. And it would probably be some sort of a hybrid structure that included both on site activity and activity at home, which many students and schools already do. Many colleges and universities already do this. But even though what they do doesn't make much sense, because even when students meet remotely, the colleges charge the same price for tuition. During COVID, you had classes canceled and all of the activity moved to Zoom meetings, and the students were charged the same tuition. That's where you can see that money and operations have no relation to one another. And the students are seen as simply the sources of money for a school that exists for its own sake, not for the students. The students are offered a fraction of the resources they normally receive and yet are asked to pay the same price. That revealed to us the nature of modern schools when we saw that. The schools are not designed to serve the students. They're designed to serve the people employed by the schools. That's the fundamental corruption in modern schooling, of the mission of modern schooling. And again, the mission statement we established to provide quality Catholic education for every Catholic child would immediately destroy that selfish view of education. So we would see that mission statement, we would see the real responsibility to provide quality Catholic education for all Catholic children. We would see that the modern K-12 layout or the division and sorting of the children would have nothing to do with such a school system. We would see that there's a need for a hierarchical system, which again has been used all through church history, all through even not Christian history, wherever there's been wisdom. We would then see that talk of facilities or arrangement of studies practically would be completely different and would have to be thought of creatively in light of present technology, and that would be something that would need to regularly change to adapt with changes in technology and resources. It would likely be some sort of a hybrid structure consisting of on-site activities and off-site activities. It would make use of the internet being present in every home where children could access their studies, work asynchronously. They don't all need to be kept together on today's lesson because we're not following the modern public school method. Databases would be able to track individual student progress. There are many, many advantages. We wouldn't have to stress about whether kids miss 10 days of the artificial 180-day school year. The kids would have access to their studies year-round. There would be no limit to the number of courses or subjects students could study. A zealous student could work through countless hours of study materials, and students who struggled could take their time and work through the necessary lessons and assessments. What we're doing in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, I think, offers a prototype of what's possible and how it can be organized. The question of facilities really applies to students who would need other services or for specific activities that we would simply want to have for the sake of community and culture. We would probably want to have a choir and a band and a theater program, and we would probably want some sort of sports or exercise clubs and so on, practical clubs. But these things are not principally the responsibility of the schools. These things are not necessary for schools. These things are luxuries and privileges, and they can be sought elsewhere. My daughter, for example, has a wonderful Protestant ballet teacher. We don't need a Catholic ballet teacher in our county. We've got a great school of dance, but we have no Catholic school. The essentials are missing. We don't need to worry about these accidental extracurricular activities, though they may be desired, but they can't be allowed to take over the activity and distract us from the mission, which is quality Catholic education for every child. We're not responsible to teach children ballet. We're not responsible to teach boys how to play football. We're not responsible to create a marching band. We are responsible to provide a quality Catholic education that includes an evangelistic catechesis and compulsory education requirements, and we need to provide that for every Catholic child. So, as far as my advice for reform, I think once you establish the mission statement, the problems are exposed. And we either choose to ignore them or we choose to address them. And it's not a question of making some subtle changes. It's not finding some clever new principal who's going to come in and change this or that to the existing. We have to be honest and admit that the existing model is a dead man walking. It's never going to work. And even more importantly, it doesn't address the mission, the necessary mission for the schools. And so the longer we sustain that failed system, the longer we sustain it, the more certain will be its collapse. And we'll have no one to blame but ourselves, because it's obvious that it's not serving the needs and it's not sustainable. And so we can just ignore it and pretend it's not our job. But it is our job. It is our job as Catholics to provide for the welfare, for the education of all Catholic children. If we're going to take that seriously, there's going to have to be, I wouldn't even say reform, I would say reinvention. And thankfully, we don't need to invent anything because it's already been done all through history, because it's simple, practical wisdom applied to real life circumstances. What's artificial and imprudent is the modern K-12 grade level system. It's oppressive, it's unjust, it's unproductive. It leads to incredible injustices and debts in society. All of the complaining about property taxes is largely related to the funding of public schools. Why would we be imitating that system? It makes no sense. So, as far as reform goes, like I said, let's establish the mission statement and make sure it makes sense. Then let's consider how that mission can be fulfilled and do whatever it takes to fulfill it. And then let's let that mission statement and those objectives, those means, determine for us all of the detailed practical arrangements that are necessary. And what we'll find is it's not difficult at all to create schools that can fulfill the mission that we've discussed and do so with all children in mind for minimal costs. Seeing the Classical Liberal Arts Academy being managed by one person for minimal costs, and our costs are going to be going down significantly this year because we can. To see the Classical Liberal Arts Academy being managed by one person at a fraction of costs of modern schools, we're likely going to lower the student plan from $25 a month for tuition down to $10 a month for tuition. And we may even get rid of our premium enrollment because it's just not going to be necessary. We're going to be working to reduce the costs of study even further and further and further. And seeing what we're doing in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy and seeing that For all of the excuses, it's accredited by Cognia, should leave no question that this isn't idle talk. This isn't some ivory tower crazy guy talking about what he thinks others should do. This is what I am doing. And it could easily serve a multiplying number of students. I'm not even saying that the Classical Liberal Arts Academy should be the source of this. I'm saying the Classical Liberal Arts Academy reveals the prototype or the model of what's possible. And that would be my recommendation for the reform of Catholic schools. I hope that helps. God bless.